Thank you all so much for joining us today. Senator Woodward, can you give us an update on where we are in full-day kindergarten?
The full-day kindergarten, there's consensus surrounding a couple of things. One, we want to offer it here in Idaho, and also that it should be optional. Once we get past that, there are a lot of different ideas. The first method might be just to put the money out and make it available to all the school districts through literacy funds. And that has some advantages, the local flexibility. There are different situations in every school district across the state. There are also folks who've been interested in and worked on it for some time to just go into the school formula and when we show how many classroom hours for each grade of school, add that in and put the hours in. Say we would have 800 hours of kindergarten happening, still at an optional level, voluntary for parents to be able to participate in. And then the latest proposal we're hearing is something in response to the idea of the literacy funding. That literacy funding goes out typically based on performance, and the lower the performance of a district, and the more funding they receive to try and bring them up to par. The proposal I'm hearing right now, that I've not read yet, is a combination of progress that's being made, and so you're rewarding for progress, and then also looking at head count, which is more in line with our normal student funding formula in the schools.
And when you say voluntary, you mean for the parents and families, not for the school districts?
Yes, that's correct. When I say voluntary, that parents can opt into the program and participate in either half-day kindergarten or full-day kindergarten.
There are competing proposals, I know. Can you give us some insight into what the leading proposal right now might be?
I don't know what's really leading. We're going to have a conversation this coming week in Senate Education. Then we'll see what comes of that and what the different ideas are.
Representative Boyle, a lot of these conversations are starting on the Senate side. How involved has the House been?
Well, individuals have been involved. I've been involved in this for quite a while. John probably has as well.
We've certainly hear some of what takes place in the Senate, but on the House side, we are waiting to see what finally comes across from the Senate. Representative Boyle's had a bill last year, so we know that there is interest, obviously, on both sides, and it's something that is popular among people in Idaho. So at the end of the day, it's going to be, what can we get across the finish line?
But is this the year that you're going to get something across the finish line?
I hope so. I know a lot of people in my district would like to see that happen. In Boise, the Boise schools are going to be offering full day, regardless of what the legislature does. But I'm sure that my constituents would like to see some of that state funding to support that.
I wanted to ask your thoughts, Representative Boyle, on the governor's proposal to give out early literacy funding to the different school districts. You know better than anyone that school districts are so different across the state. What are your thoughts on that flexibility, or should it be uniform statewide kindergarten for every district?
Well, every district is different, as you said. I like the idea of an option. If districts want to go for full-time, they can. If they don't feel they can or don't want to, they don't have to. I don't think we should force that on anyone.
Conversations about full-day kindergarten, do they include the Supreme Court challenge to Idaho's public school system and the idea of, or the constitutional mandate that the state needs to provide uniform public education across the state? As Representative McCrostie mentioned, other school districts are offering this, but not everybody is.
And different school districts are funding them through various different ways. Some are using supplemental levies, finding areas in their budgets, receiving grants. There are very different ways. In terms of constitutionality and the requirement for a uniform system of public schools, I think that for the legislature to do something about that is an appropriate path, but I can't really speak to any pending lawsuits.
On the Senate side, is that a conversation that comes up?
I haven't heard that topic really in this kindergarten conversation. What I do know is, I think this is the year, we have a governor's recommended budget that includes the funding for it. And so I think whatever shape it may take, whether a policy bill comes or not, I believe we'll see from the Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee and hopefully going through both bodies of the legislature, the funding. And right now, as it's proposed, it goes out $47 million of new funding in literacy. It's one piece of this investment we're making in education this year that totals to about $300 million. About half of that $300 million is one time this year. Paying earlier on the career ladder, or basically moving up a year on the career ladder. Bonuses for teachers, classified staff, and administrators, $36 million for that. We're just really putting an emphasis on education in Idaho. I think it's great. We're making some progress. The other big piece of that $300 million, of course, is the teacher health care component, which is passed and signed into law. That's $105 million of ongoing money, along with $75 million that's required for districts to move into the program. So.
And since you brought up public education funding, those bills will be introduced in the Joint Finance Appropriations Committee in the next week. Can you give us a preview?
Well, that's a big piece of it, the K-12 budget. We've just been working on that. We sit as 20 members, 10 House members and 10 Senate members in the Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee, but we oftentimes work outside of that without a quorum in small groups, and that's the process we've been going through. When we get done here, I'll go back and work on that some more this afternoon.
And you worked on the higher education budgets this past week as well. What are the highlights from those higher ed budgets?
I think the real highlight from the higher education budget is that $643 million going into the higher education system. There was a little bit of controversy around it, just some different ideas of the funding mechanisms. The prevailing motion was to utilize some higher education stabilization funding at Boise, the purpose being to avoid a tuition increase, tuition and fees. So supportive of that, but I wasn't supportive originally of using stabilization funds when we have such a strong, when we're performing so strong as a state in revenue.
And for people who aren't familiar with budget setting, those stabilization funds are basically the rainy day accounts if our economy isn't doing as well.
And yes, exactly. We used rainy day funds in that budget, $4 million out of 643, but we did use rainy day funds when I think the sun's shining pretty bright right now.
No, we can't talk about higher education budgets without talking about the fights that we've seen, particularly in the House, over the last several years. Are we going to see repeats of those debates again on the House floor when those budgets come up this year, Representative Boyle?
Very possible, if things have not changed at all.
And when you talk about things not changing?
We haven't seen that BSU has changed anything.
And you're talking about social justice programs. Mm-hmm. And Representative McCrostie, I'd love to get your response to that.
So, I guess part of what I would say is like literally before we came with you this afternoon, Representative Ehart and I passed a campus free speech bill. Through that process, we involved a number of different stakeholders, including all the universities, and Boise State was a major contributor to that, and ensuring that students on campus have their constitutional free speech rights protected, as enshrined in the U.S. Constitution and the Idaho Constitution. I think BSU has been a fair player in these conversations. So I would hope that that there would be some goodwill at minimum for their involvement in this process with us.
Does that sway your vote at all, knowing that BSU has come to the table and has tried to work with lawmakers to address those concerns?
Well, coming to the table and performing are two different things.
So I'll take
we'll
that.
See.
We'll see.
Can I have
please,
one comment? I
please.
just want to say about this higher education where we've battled over these budgets the last few years. I think what we need to do is maybe get the right people in the room and set out a vision or a strategic plan of where we need to go with higher ed. If we can get buy-in from folks, that has worked well for us in the past. K-12 Education Task Force, we've done that twice, I think about 2013 and then just a few years ago, set out a goal. And then when we come together as a legislature every year, there's already some general consensus of what we're trying to do. And so we probably ought to figure out who the people are and get them back in a room together and make that vision. That's the State Board of Education, the executive branch with the governor, and then utilizing people from across the state. The business is telling us, I've had numerous conversations with owners of large businesses around the state. They need a workforce. We need to have an effective higher education system, which includes everything from the 4-year university model, the 2-year community college, or any kind of ongoing education that provides someone who's skills and education to get out in the workforce and be part of this productive Idaho economy.
And I'd love to get your thoughts on that, Representative Boyle, because the leaders of 4-year and 2-year institutions, both in the state, have said that concerns over social justice and critical race theory are a distraction from these goals of getting Idaho students workforce ready. I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Well, last year we had some BSU students who came in. They were afraid to give their names even because they were afraid they would be ostracized, grades would go down. And they came in and spoke with us. Honestly, these kids were scared, and the things they told us were outrageous.
Like what?
So, well, like one girl was a medical, she was going in to be a doctor. And she said her classes, they were told there are 17 different genders. She said, I've had biology, I know that isn't true. There are 2 genders, but I'm afraid to speak up. I spoke up once and I received an F on my next grade.
Representative McCrostie, I wanted to get your thoughts.
Sure. You know, the workplace is demanding a diverse workforce, and our students need to be exposed to a diverse array of ideas. It's part of what we need to teach our young people is how to think for themselves. And I think that's the goal of our K-12 system. And as they go into higher education, then they can start to map out what it is that they want for their careers. But at the end of the day, we want our young people to be able to think for themselves and to be exposed to different ideas. If there is a group that believes that there are 17 or more different genders to be represented and one that represents 2, then all of those ideas need to be brought together, discussed, form your own ideas, but understand that there are other ideas that are out there. And we do want our young people to be able to think for themselves as they enter the workforce, because that's what they're going to be exposed to in the real workplace.
You know, the conversation about what students are being taught and what they're exposed to in the real world also came up in the testimony over content standards in public schools this week. Can you give us a rundown of what the conversation was about in the first place for people who weren't familiar?
So this is a conversation on these content standards that we've had for 6 or 7 years, and part of it goes back to concerns surrounding the idea of Common Core, or that this is something that is so universal that we're trying to push ideas that come from the federal government or something to that effect. There are concerns around Common Core, to say the least.
But the idea is to make sure that whether you're getting your education in Idaho or Washington or Florida, that you have that similar baseline, right?
Exactly, that there is a similar baseline that students can draw from if they end up moving from Idaho to Oregon to Washington or wherever they happen to be. In Idaho, we have not had Common Core, with an argument being, well, a lot of what you have looks like Common Core. So as we have had those discussions over year after year after year after year after year after year after year,
it's been a while.
It's been a long time. You know, we have honed and refined and brought work groups together and reached out to stakeholders. Personally, I feel like the couple of bills that we have passed will solidify the content standards so that our teachers can and our school districts can establish the curriculum that they need in order to provide instruction, rather than having this in the 7-year flux.
Were the changes really that dramatic that were proposed this week?
I think some of them were. For a couple of years, there have been teachers, former teachers, parents that have met, just like John said. They have done a really good job to come up with different ideas of what they'd like to see, especially in math.
Would you agree?
I think that what the work groups, especially in the last couple of years, that the standards that they have finalized, I mean, I would have accepted one from maybe like 3 years ago, but I have agreed to go through the process, and I think what we have is it's an important line in the sand that from here we can go forward and everybody has a set of standards that they can rely on instead of being in a continual state of flux.
You know, Senator, so much of this conversation has happened on the House side. Is the Senate going to concur with these proposed changes?
I think as long as they're reasonable, then everyone will be ready to get on board with the idea of content standards, which we have and we want to have in place, and so we need to get those approved and then move on down the road. Hopefully we've taken out some of the flashpoints in them that cause people consternation.
What were those flashpoints?
It typically revolves around the wording that climate change, and so that's a national discussion, and some people believe that we are affecting the earth, others don't.
One of the things that was brought up while we were discussing this in committee yesterday was whether we call it climate variability or climate change. And at the end of the day, I feel like what really matters isn't the word that you attach to it. It is those standards and the information that our young people need to be taught on whatever name that you attach to this issue.
A lot of the problem in the House committee, not this year, but in the previous time, the things that we saw were teaching that anything that man touched was bad. Mining, logging, irrigation, you know, it was very one-sided, and that's why a lot of the House members got all fuzzed up over it.
And in fairness, I think it's fair to say that we do want our young people to think for themselves, and that we don't want teachers to impose viewpoints, and we don't want standards to impose a viewpoint more than anything. And so to provide a standard that is neutral with regard to its content, and to be able to have our students learn that, I think it's been a good lesson. And again, I hope it's something that we can draw a line in the sand and go forward with.
Does that neutrality still acknowledge, though, that the vast majority of scientists still say that whether you call it climate variability or climate change, that humans have an impact on long-term climate?
My read of the standards still acknowledges the man-made aspect as well as what man can do about it.
Which isn't much.
Representative, real quick, I wanted to ask you about your dyslexia legislation. On Friday morning, it passed out of the House Education Committee after glowing testimony from so many people. Can you give us a rundown of what that is?
I am so happy everybody finally came together with that, and we have a really strong bill. We had a unanimous vote. It was amazing, and the ladies came that helped write that, the moms who have faced that diagnosis, or sometimes not even a diagnosis, and there were college kids there who had dyslexia talking about their problems. We had a PhD there who said she had dyslexia. She was Teacher of the Year, I can't remember what, 15, yeah. Teacher of the Year, her mom has it, her daughter has it. About 20% of the kids have it, and we just were not diagnosing it. They didn't even want to talk about the word. It was some kind of a dirty word. So this is how kids learn how to read, so let's help them any way we can.
What exactly does the bill do?
Well, one, it makes definitions in our code of what it is. It provides resources for teachers, professional development for them. We are going to test the kids K through 3, and then if we see some kind of problem or a new kid comes in or a parent says, I think my child has a problem, then we'll test past grade 3.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us today, and Senator, we'll let you get back to those budgets.
Thank you.